Welcome to the Kern Airmanship Model in Detail. This is the first webinar in this 11 webinar series, and today we're going to take a pretty detailed look. However, it is still going to be an overview of the Kern Airmanship Model. And just a quick checkout for those of you who have not attended a GoToWebinar before. You have a white arrow in that orange box that collapses or expands the control panel. That should look something like this up in the upper right hand corner of your screen. You can send me questions or comments via text by clicking or entering text in this box and hitting send, or you can ask a question or get my attention by clicking on this icon, the raise your hand icon. This is a Wings Pilot Proficiency Program webinar, so you will receive 1 knowledge credit for attending. Webinar sponsors are the FAST team, the FAA safety team, and as you probably already know, the mission of the FAST team is to improve aviation safety and convey safety principles and practices. Another webinar sponsor is the Center for Airmanship Excellence. The Center for Airmanship Excellence purpose is the promotion of airmanship excellence and the expansion of airmanship education among existing and potential new pilots. The Center for Airmanship Excellence is a web-based resource for pilots who are pursuing airmanship excellence. Here are some of those resources you can access through the website. Captain Dave's Hangar, that's my blog on airmanship. You can request to download the Airmanship Excellence Questionnaire, which you'll use if you decide to develop an airmanship development plan. You also can check the schedule of Airmanship Excellence events and register for them. The site also contains Airmanship Excellence archives, where you can find various resources. We'll talk about that in a second. Here are some of those resources. Here's an Airmanship Excellence event webinar that was recorded, Airmanship Development Support Organization Demonstrator. So if you're interested in pursuing airmanship development, you'll definitely want to take a look at that. And you can download PDF versions of the slides for the original seminar series for redefining airmanship. But I'd recommend if you are interested in learning more about airmanship after this webinar, that you go back to this area of the archives and download or request a download of all of these Redefining Airmanship, your free airmanship development plan webinar sessions. There are 6 of them, about an hour long each, so about 6 hours of programming there. But that will give you a better overview and ground you better for this close look that we're going to take at the current airmanship model over these 11 webinars in the current series. And I would also encourage you to go to the Center for Airmanship Excellence website and register for airmanship updates. You just put in your email address, name, and zip code, and you will be put on the list, the distribution list for airmanship updates, which will keep you in the loop on airmanship excellence events, new things that are in the archives, other things related to airmanship development. And here is the website address. And I've got a question for those of you who are attending this webinar live. I'm just curious to know if if you've attended the Redefining Airmanship webinar seminar series, if you viewed it or attended it. Did you attend or view none of them, some of them, most of them, or all of them? The Current Airmanship Model in Detail webinar series consists, as I mentioned, of 11 sessions. This is the first session. We're going to look at the overview of the current airmanship model. And then session 2, we'll look at flight discipline, then skill, proficiency. In session 5, self, aircraft, team, environment, risk, situational awareness in session 10, and finally judgment in session 11. Well, why are we interested in airmanship development in the first place? Well, for one thing, we believe that airmanship development provides new challenges for all of us who are pursuing airmanship excellence. The $100 hamburger has gotten a little old. Uh, Once you get a license, a certificate, sometimes there are no more challenges that you see immediately in front of you, so we start losing our interest or start flying less. So we think that if you pursue this course of airmanship development, the new challenges that you'll face and face frequently in a structured way will encourage you to fly more. The quest for airmanship excellence is rewarding, and it's rewarding in many ways. If you're an Avemco insurance customer, they give you a discount if you are pursuing airmanship studies. Now, I can't tell you exactly how their plan works right now, but if you're an Avemco customer, I encourage you to look into that, so it can be financially rewarding. Also, airmanship excellence is rewarding because as you meet these many challenges that are contained in an airmanship development plan, you get satisfaction from that. That's a reward. We all, I think most pilots, respond to challenges, and we feel good when we meet the challenges, the new challenges. It's also rewarding, and probably the biggest payoff that I can think of is the increased level of safety that you'll enjoy in your flying. And this is rewarding to you, of course, in terms of longevity, but it's also rewarding to your loved ones, because if you're not around, then they aren't going to like that. Also, your passengers, and those might be those loved ones in the airplane with you, but any of your passengers, that increased level of safety, increased level of airmanship that you possess will be rewarding to them. And of course, even the people who are under your flight path, if you turn out to not be a good airman and crash into them, then that's not too good. So it can be rewarding for everybody in a lot of different ways. The pursuit of airmanship excellence increases safety, and there's no doubt about that. The airlines pursue airmanship excellence. They have programs that do that. The military does, and now charter operators are starting to do it. And in every case where the pursuit of airmanship excellence is included in the culture of that organization, we call that the safety culture, safety increases. And we believe that by applying those same techniques and processes and procedures and tools with personal flying, the kind of flying that we do, that the level of airmanship will improve and safety will be increased. Airmanship development requires increased flight activity. If you're going to pursue airmanship excellence, you're going to have to fly regularly and as often as you can, which will increase flight activity. In the early 80s, piston engine flight activity in the United States was about 35 million hours a year. Now it's down to about 14 million hours a year, about a 60% decrease. So for the good of the industry, and it's really in our own self-interest, because all of the trend lines in the industry right now are down and to the right. The number of pilots is dwindling, the flight activity is dwindling, number of new aircraft being produced is dwindling, the age of the pilot population is increasing. All of these things may lead to the end of personal flying in this country, or at least it will make it so expensive because of the few people who pursue it. It will be so expensive that only those few people can afford it. So we've got to do something to get the flight hours back up, and then actually then started to increase them again beyond the 80 levels. So we believe that airmanship development will help this because it requires increased flight activity. And because if we can bring more people in through airmanship, pursuing airmanship excellence as new pilots, get the current pilots flying more, it stands to reason that the overall cost of flying will be reduced because the overhead will be spread over a larger customer base. Now, the big question that I like to throw in here at this point in all of the webinar series and seminar series is a question that we should all be asking ourselves: if I don't fly right, should I fly at all? Now, this is General Chuck Yeager here, and he says that, if you're going to fly, you ought to do it right. Well, I agree with that completely. In fact, I was doing a airmanship for new airmen seminar last week, and had a young fellow in there that had learned to fly within the last year, And he was telling me that his biggest challenge is finding the cheapest airplane to fly, which then of course drives him into the oldest airplanes to fly, and doing everything on a shoestring and so that he can fly at all. And I swallowed hard, looked him in the eye, and said, well, if you don't fly right, you really shouldn't be flying at all. And I hope that once you go through as much as you can of either this webinar series, but especially the Redefining Airmanship webinar series, that you will come to the same conclusion that I have come to, which is if I don't fly right, I'm not going to fly at all. And in fact, I live that right now. I limit the kind of flying I do based on that's the only kind that I can do right at this point. This whole webinar series is based on the book Redefining Airmanship, and if you attended any of the Redefining Airmanship webinar or seminar series, you'll know that this book formed the basis for that series also. It was written by Dr. Colonel Tony Kern and published in 1997. Let me give you Kern's bio here quickly. He's a retired U.S. Air Force command pilot, former professor of military history at the Air Force Academy. He's authored 5 books on pilot performance. I'd say that he has probably done the most research and turned that research into usable, understandable information that we can all use than anybody that I know of anyhow, maybe anybody ever, on airmanship. The books include Redefining Airmanship, which we just talked about. Also, Flight Discipline, a whole book on flight discipline. Remember that, as you're going to see if you haven't attended any of these before, or as you remember, flight discipline is one of the bedrock principles of the Kern Airmanship model. He wrote a whole book on that. He also wrote Darker Shades of Blue, The Rogue Pilot, and I would submit there's a little bit of rogue pilot in all of us, so we need to understand that. He has a master's degree in public administration and military history and a doctorate in higher education, specializing in human factors training design. So I think he's the man. The senior guys that are involved in the Center for Airmanship Excellence along with me all agree with me that there's nothing that we have read in any of his books so far that we don't agree with. We think he's the man, so that's why these series are based on what he's done here. I'm your presenter today, Dave Cook. Pronounce that Cook, although it's spelled K-O-C-H. I've got about, somewhere north of 18,000 flight hours. I was a pilot for United for 22 years, from 1968 to 1990 when I took an early retirement. I was about 42 years old then. U.S. Army National Guard rotary wing aviator for about 10 years while I was flying for United. I also flew for a couple of years for the Army Reserves. I flew with the Guard out of Midway, the Reserves out of DuPage, and up at Glenview before they closed Glenview. After I retired from United, I had, of course, like all of us, a long bucket list of all the things we want to do in aviation. And one thing on my bucket list was to be a simulator instructor. I didn't have the opportunity to do any simulator instructing when I was with United because we had all professional instructors. They weren't line pilots until the early 80s. And about the time they started accepting line pilots as simulator instructors at our training center in Denver, I was working as the assistant to the president of United for space shuttle acquisition. So I was having too good a time doing that, learning how to fly the space shuttle and all of those sorts of things, that I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to go out and become a simulator instructor for United. So I was able to fulfill that, one of my piloting desires, after I retired, and went out to Tucson in the Challenger program for flight safety, and did that for about 4 years as an instructor. And training center evaluator is the simulator community's equivalent of a check pilot. So I was able to give airline transport pilot, commercial pilot ratings, private pilot ratings, that sort of thing in the simulator. I've been a FAST team representative for about a year now. I've been a general aviation pilot my whole career, started out in general aviation, and I've always flown in general aviation. I've been a CFI in airplanes and instruments for 45 years. Came a little later to getting the ground instructor credentials, although I always did a lot of ground instructing, and got my advanced and instrument ground instructor certificates about 13 years ago. I'm currently a simulator and ground instructor at Glass Simulator Center at Aurora Airport, where I do primarily insurance mandated initial and recurrent training for guys who are flying high performance single and twin engine airplanes, and we do that in the simulator. I do that part-time, keep my head in the game. I enjoy it. I'm the co-author of the book Vault Security, the real story about airline safety. I co-wrote that with my wife, who's also a professional level pilot, and I am the executive director of the Center for Airmanship Excellence. Now, I've highlighted these 4 bullet points because those are areas where I operated in organizations and cultures that encouraged, supported, facilitated airmanship development. They had safety cultures, and they had safety management systems. So when I talk about all the stuff that we go over in the webinars and seminars, it isn't just the book learning out of Kern's book. It's all these years operating in these environments. Well, let's start with the roots and essence of airmanship. You know, we can trace, I believe, the roots of airmanship all the way back to mythology, back to the ancient Greeks. And you probably have read the story of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus was the son, Daedalus was the father. They were in a jail on a Greek island, and they decided to escape by fashioning wings made out of wax and feathers. And boy, they worked, by golly, and they started flying away from the island. But Icarus, being a young guy, started feeling his oats, and he started flying up closer and closer to the sun. His father warned him not to do that, but Icarus kept going. I think he was overconfident, obviously. Got too close to the sun, the wax melted, the feathers fell off, and Icarus crashed. Of course, didn't burn because there was nothing to burn, but he crashed and killed himself. So that is, of course, a myth, but it's at the root of airmanship, the airmanship story, if you will. Because if you look at this airmanship thing, you come to the conclusion that airmanship requires an integrated understanding of your flying mechanism, your teammates, your environment, and yourself. And Icarus certainly didn't have an integrated understanding of his flying machine, didn't know how it worked. His teammates, he didn't listen to his father, he didn't believe his father knew what he was talking about. Obviously his environment got too close to the sun, and he didn't know himself. He was overconfident. That's what caused his crash. So trace it all the way back there. Then when the Wright brothers came along, however, things started getting formalized. They actually were the first guys to learn how to fly a powered, controllable aircraft. And of course, yeah, they did teach themselves and each other, but they actually started laying down on paper and in practice airmanship. And they told us about the things that we need to be good airmen, and part of that was knowledge of their aircraft. They certainly had that. Knowledge of each other. If you read any of their autobiographies, it's really interesting to see how they chose who was going to fly on a certain day based on their individual strengths and weaknesses. They knew their environment. They went to Kitty Hawk because they had researched the best place for their test flights, and they knew themselves. They knew their individual strengths and weaknesses personally. And then the early pioneers brought in things like planning, knowledge, and discipline to the airmanship equation. By World War I, things were starting to really get organized, and by World War I, complete airmen were seen as disciplined, skilled, and proficient, possessing an understanding of their aircraft, themselves, their teammates, their environment, and their risks. By World War II, we had moved to the next level in understanding airmanship, and in World War II was recognized that discipline, skill, proficiency, and knowledge yield situational awareness and good judgment. Now, of course, we have continuous formal airmanship development supported by a safety culture and safety management systems, but only at the airlines, military, and some charter operators. Personal flying is next, and that's what this whole series of webinars and seminars is all about, is to start introducing this into our flying as personal flyers so that we can get the benefits of these types of approaches to airmanship. Let's let's talk about a shared definition of airmanship here, so that while we're talking about it, we always know that we're talking about the same thing. And let's lay out the definition this way. Expert airmen possess discipline, skill, and proficiency. Expert airmen have a thorough understanding of themselves, their aircraft, their team, the environment they operate in, and the risks they face. Expert airmen consistently, and that's the key word there, not every now and then, consistently display exceptional, that's another key word, situational awareness, and use good judgment at all times. So that's our definition, our common definition of an expert airman, someone who is striving to reach airmanship excellence. And I think most of us would agree that Chuck Yeager is one of the airmanship icons we all turn to. And here's a direct quote from General Yeager: "If you're going to fly, do it right." So that's what I was talking about earlier. All right, let's get into the Kern Airmanship model now. In the Kern Airmanship model, we have three bedrock principles: flight discipline, skill, and proficiency. And upon those three bedrock principles sit the 5 pillars of knowledge: self, knowledge of aircraft; team, knowledge of environment; knowing our risks. And then upon those 5 pillars of knowledge rest the capstone outcomes of situational awareness and judgment. Let me say that again, but a little different way. If we practice as airmen the bedrock principles of flight discipline, skill, and proficiency, while always striving for a more perfect knowledge of ourselves, the aircraft we fly, our team, the environment we operate in, and the risks we face, then we can expect ever-improving capstone outcomes of increased situational awareness and judgment. Well, let's start with flight discipline in our quick overview here. Let's define flight discipline. Flight discipline is the ability and willpower, both of those, ability and willpower, to safely employ an aircraft within operational, regulatory, organizational, and common sense guidelines. Flight discipline must be the foundation of an aviator's airmanship package. So discipline is the key to everything. If we don't have flight discipline, good flight discipline, then we might as well not even pursue the rest of the Kern Airmanship model towards airmanship excellence, because we have no chance of improving without really good flight discipline. Here are some personal views about flight discipline. First is Colonel Eileen Collins. She was a shuttle astronaut, commanded, a couple flights, I believe. She says the need for a disciplined approach to airmanship exists at all levels of flying. And I would agree with her. Even at our level of flying, there's a need for the disciplined approach to airmanship. Captain John Cook, who was a Concorde training captain, said, "In order to have the freedom of flight, you must have the discipline." We all want the freedom of flight. I hear this over and over when I'm talking to guys. Well, I don't really want to get this discipline because I want to have the freedom. Well, the discipline is what gets you the freedom, because discipline prevents crashes. Without discipline, you're free, all right, but you're free to go crash. And as you know, general aviation has a horrendous safety record compared to other segments of the industry. All right, let's look at skill, the second bedrock principle. Skill building. Skill and proficiency are two edges of the airmanship sword. So as you'll see when we talk about proficiency here too, that you really can't talk about them separately, but we will here to just step through things. But they're two edges of the airmanship sword. Confidence is the big reward for a high level of skill. Big reward. And in webinar 3, we're going to talk a lot about confidence, underconfidence, and overconfidence. Aviation is terribly unforgiving of inattention, carelessness, or neglect. And we know that. That's been preached to us since our first days of aviation, I hope. It has, I know it was with me. We can't neglect our airmanship skills. We have to acquire the skills, we have to improve the skills, but guess what? If we don't use the skills, they deteriorate rapidly. So we can't neglect our airmanship skills. Flying requires multiple skills that are developed in and out of formal flight training. Too many of us think that we only acquire our skills when we're going through some kind of training course. Well, if that's true, we're in deep trouble, because for most of us, the first step is the private pilot certificate, and then the next step, if there is one, is the instrument rating. Well, that's a huge step. And if you say, well, I'm not going to develop my skills or even maintain my skills between the time I get a private and I get my instrument rating, you're going to be a pretty poor pilot well before you get to that next training course. You've got to develop your skills every time you fly. That flying is expensive in terms of time and money and effort and focus, so we've got to make each hour of flying count towards improving our airmanship skills. In addition to physical flying skills, excellent airmanship requires excellent communication skills, decision-making skills, team skills, and self-assessment skills. Self-assessment skills are the toughest ones to learn, but they're the most critical. But notice that all of these are skills. It's skills. You can learn skills. You can improve skills. So even though you may not be really good in any of these areas right now, there are definite ways to learn them and improve them. Traditional flight training programs build to a predetermined minimum skill level for safe operations. That's the way it is. That's the way it always has been. We have to have some kind of system. The FAA has decided over the years, in conjunction with the industry, what standards have to be met for various levels of certification, which provide us with certain privileges. Private pilot, for example, you have the privileges of a private pilot. So to earn those privileges, to get the certificate, you have to meet certain standards of skill, but there are only minimum skill levels for safe operations. Problem with that is you have those minimum levels of skill, and then you're turned loose, with the example of the private pilot, into the flying environment. Well, yeah, you're safe the day you finish your check ride, but those skills start to deteriorate rapidly. Just think of your crosswind landing skills, or your soft field, better example, soft field takeoff and landing skills. You're pretty good at those when you get your private, because you've got to demonstrate it. You practice it. How often do you really practice soft field, short field takeoff and landing skills when you're out there flying around? Those skills have probably atrophied considerably. So then you're out there, though, flying in that flight environment, and maybe once every 2 years you go get your flight review, and the instructor may or may not take a close look at your flying skills or some of your flying skills or whatever. Very loosey-goosey operation, that flight review, in my opinion. So you're out there, start out the minimum level of safety, then you're out there with deteriorating skill levels. Typical recurrent training only checks for a minimum level of proficiency also. So if you happen to be involved in an operation that requires recurrent training, and I don't count that biennial flight review as recurrent training. It's not rigorous enough. It's not often enough. For example, if you're, I'll say, a private pilot with under 500 hours and you've been flying for 5 to 10 years, which is pretty typical out there, you should really be getting recurrent training every 90 days. If you have more time, higher skill level, instrument rating, and so forth, maybe it's every 6 months. If you've got a lot of time like I do, but I'm flying frequently and I have a professional development plan, then probably about once a year for recurrent training. So it depends on your level of airmanship, how often you should get it. But when you do get recurrent training, it should be formal, and it should be thorough, and it should be focused on your weaknesses, which that flight review every 2 years is not. But whatever kind of proficiency check you get, recurrent training, it checks for a minimum level. These requirements are designed to keep you safe, but not necessarily to help you reach your potential as an aviator. Individual excellence requires you to personally manage your own airmanship development. Airmanship excellence requires you to seek continuous improvement. Got to be going on the whole time you're flying. It can't be something you do every now and then. Continuous improvement. And it has to be based on a rigorous evaluation of your strengths and weaknesses. And the big problem here is research is showing that we do a very poor job of evaluating our strengths and weaknesses ourselves. You have to do that constantly, but just know that you're only going to be approximate in your evaluation. We really need the input of mentor pilots, senior CFIs, check pilots, people who know what they're doing, to evaluate your strengths and weaknesses so that you can put that back into a continuous improvement plan. And it has to be rigorous, not some good old boy approach to it. It's got to be, here are the facts. This is the way it really is. All right, continuing through the model, let's look at proficiency, the last bedrock principle. Remember I mentioned that skill and proficiency are two edges of the same sword. Experience builds airmanship skills. Recent experience accounts for proficiency. So this is how they fit together. You have proficiency in skills, so skills and proficiency. Pilots with less than 500 hours in models, it's been shown through research, are at significantly greater risk for pilot error mishaps. Most of us who fly personal airplanes the way we do have less than 500 hours in the model that we're flying right now. So we're at a significantly greater risk all the time for pilot error mishaps. So we have to know going in that we have a higher risk level than if we had more time in model. Pilots with less than 10 flight hours in 30 days are at far greater risk than those with 10 to 30 hours. And this is, again, from Air Force research. So most of us in personal flying are flying less than 10 hours in 30 days. And very few of us are flying as many as 30 hours unless we're flying professionally. That study, by the way, showed that over 30 hours your proficiency actually goes down due to things like complacency and fatigue. But at any rate, most of us personal flyers are flying under that 10 hours a month. And we are at far greater risk. So there again, we have to know this. We have to recognize that at one of our risks. We have to account for it, and we have to find ways to mitigate that risk. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. We've all heard that one, and I hear everybody can parrot that one back. Whenever I start that sentence, just because it's legal, I can get one of those amens, doesn't mean that it's safe. However, do we really adhere to this? How many of us, just figure that 3 takeoffs and landings in 90 days means that we're okay, we can go out there and fly in a modest crosswind? It's not true. So legality and safety are two entirely different things. Flight skill loss occurs rapidly, and I've been talking about this throughout this presentation so far, but I can't emphasize it too much. We can't fall back and say, well, I passed my private pilot check ride, I must have the skill level I need to go out here and fly. Oh yeah, that check ride was 2 years ago, yeah, and I've only flown about 10, 15 hours in the last 2 years, but I still have that skill level because I passed that check ride. Not true at all, and again, this is not opinion. Air Force studies have proven this, and I know this. Any experienced airman knows it, that you start getting rusty in a hurry. Pilots are not good at assessing their proficiency in specific flight tests. That's what I was talking about earlier. We need somebody else taking a look at how we're doing. So here's a question, and I just ask it of yourself. How many hours do you have in the airplane you're flying right now? Remember, if it's not more than 500, then you're at a significantly higher risk of pilot error mishap. And ask yourself, how many hours are you flying now on average? And as I mentioned, I'll bet you it's probably less than 4 to 10. Well, okay, maybe if you're not flying under real challenging conditions, 10 to 30, you're proficient in whatever skill level you have. And more than 30, well, now you're starting to get complacent and have to watch for complacency and fatigue. Now, I'd like to ask you to rate your current level of airmanship within these 3 bedrock principles. Would you say they're low, just okay, or excellent right now? And if you answer excellent, I would suggest that you are probably overrating your skill level unless you've been working through a continuous airmanship development plan and you're flying frequently. All right, well, those are the 3 bedrock principles. Let's take a look now at the 5 pillars of knowledge, starting with knowledge of self. Then we'll go to aircraft, team, environment, and risk. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, said, know thyself. And that's good advice for an airman. You've got to know yourself. Tony Kern says the most critical component of the airmanship model is you. Now, there are different things you have to know about yourself. One of them, of course, is medical airworthiness. And I'll bet you that you're more concerned about the performance of your airplane than you are about yourself. You know, we give that airplane a thorough pre-flight following strict procedures. If we're really good, we have good flight discipline. We go through the checklist after we go through our flow of checking the airplane to make sure that we didn't miss anything. The way I do it is I check a section of the airplane by flow. You know, I've got to memorize, but then when I complete that section, I go through the checklist for that section to make sure I didn't miss anything. And that's discipline, but it also keeps you, because you get distracted out there on the ramp doing pre-flights, keeps you from missing something that is critical. But do you do that for yourself? Probably not as part of the pre-flight. Pilots have a tendency to think they can rise above the physiological challenges. And my image of this is John Wayne in his Army Air Corps flying hat and leather jacket, and he's got that Bowie knife between his teeth, and he's gritting down on that Bowie knife. He's got a death grip on the stick and the throttle, and he's flying through that thunderstorm, right? And then he gets on the other side of the thunderstorm, and he meets the enemy, and they shoot him in the shoulder. Then they shoot him in the leg. He's bleeding, but he can get back. He can continue the fight. You know, that's kind of the image I have of a real pilot, right? We all do. We all think we can rise above these physiological challenges, but in effect, we're just fooling ourselves. There is no way to rise above them. They affect us. This can-do attitude conflicts with realistic self-knowledge and good airmanship. And we talk about this later on in the series in much more detail, but you have got to respect things like taking over-the-counter drugs, prescription drugs, fatigue, distraction, stress. All of those things, physiological things, affect your ability to be a good airman. Here's Kern's take on personal airworthiness. Personal airworthiness is a personal responsibility. Yeah, you go to that AME whenever you get your medical, but you know how that goes. On a day-to-day basis for flying, you're your own AME. You have got to take personal responsibility for your personal airworthiness. It rests on your physical and psychological boundaries. So if you're in good shape, if you're in good mental health, your boundaries are wider. So then you can handle more. You can handle it better if you do have something that's affecting you. But if you're not in good shape, if you're not in good mental health, your boundaries aren't very wide, and then those challenges, physiological challenges, can affect us even more. If we fail to appreciate this fact, we undercut any efforts towards improvement, because if you are not aware of yourself, your personal airworthiness when you go fly, you're not going to get better. You'll just be getting by. Let's look at knowledge of aircraft now. The key to knowledge of aircraft is continuous and systematic study. If you want to know your airplane, you've got to do this. You've got to be continuous and you've got to be systematic. Give you an example. I was flying pretty complex airplanes there at United Airlines. A lot to learn and a lot to keep in your head. And the training courses, although they were thorough and long, were not. There was still a lot left to learn after you got out of those training courses. So my policy was that on every trip, we call them trips, so 1, 2, 3 day trip. Every trip I would read one section of the manual. Now our manuals, there were actually 3 of them, and if you count the flight ops manual, that's 4 of them. But let's just talk about the airplane. For the airplane, there were 3 of them, and so I would take one section out of one of those manuals on every trip, and I'd read it. So that way, throughout the year, I was continuously reading the manual on the airplane. But it was only, a couple hours on each trip, and I do that on layovers or sitting around or whatever. A little more challenge for personal flyers. We've got to carve that time out of our busy lives, but you've got to do it. There is no way around it. So you read the manual. You continuously are reading the manual. You're looking then when you, if that's getting to where you remember everything in there as you read through it, Then you need to go get the maintenance manual for your airplane. Start reading the maintenance manual. And it's got to be systematic, though. You got to say, okay, I'm going to start with this section. I'm going to go all the way through here. I'm going to go do this. So there's a lot of other things we'll talk about later on how you can expand your knowledge of your airplane. But bottom line that I'd like you to take away from this slide is it's got to be continuous and systematic. And you also need to discover the unwritten knowledge, the ergonomic gotchas of the airplane. You got to talk to other pilots that fly it. You got to join aircraft type clubs. You've got to subscribe to the ADs and the service difficulty reports from the FAA. They shoot them out on email to you if you subscribe, because all of those things are not in the manuals that will help you to understand your airplane better. You also have to use this knowledge as part of a team. For example, there's a lot of examples I could give, but I'll give you the big one. If you own your own airplane, or if you're flying an airplane at a rental operation, whenever that airplane goes into annual inspection, you ought to spend at least 2 to 4 hours during that inspection hanging out with the mechanic, especially if it's your own airplane, because he'll give you a lot of knowledge about that airplane that you didn't have. He's part of your team, so you've got to use that knowledge as part of a team. Here's what Kern has to say on knowledge of aircraft. Even the most knowledgeable aviators experience inner doubts about their systems and procedural knowledge. I can attest that is very true. Perhaps that is the mark of airmanship relative to aircraft knowledge, the fear that we might not know enough. And I can acknowledge that too. That's what drives me, is that I'm worried about being unprepared for the big day when everything goes really bad, and I don't want to be heading down there straight down towards the center of the earth because I didn't know my airplane well enough. This fear in turn fuels the quest for greater understanding. True airmanship is revealed by a systematic and disciplined approach to continuous learning. So there it is again from Kern directly. It has to be continuous, has to be systematic. All right, let's look at knowledge of team next. The value of teamwork. Teamwork seeks to improve performance in 3 primary ways. Number 1, it adds to the pool of knowledge and expertise available to confront various situations. So it isn't just our brain, it's the brain, all the brains in our team that can provide more expertise to solve individual problems. Number 2, it allows for a synthesis of ideas and skills to make new options available to the group. So again, if it's just your ideas and just your skills, there's a limited set of options. The more people on the team, the more options there'll be to solve problems. And number 3, the expert teams are capable of synergy. The sum is equal to more, the sum of the parts is equal to more than the individual parts. So by putting our heads together, we can get better solutions. Teamwork is an aviator's insurance policy, and I think this is a good way to look at it, the teamwork approach. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to come back to this in later webinars. One of the main reasons, in my opinion, that airline flying is so safe, 34 times safer statistically than general aviation. The reason it's so safe is that there's a team on every flight. It isn't just the PIC. He's got the co-pilot. He's got the flight attendants. Now you may say, well, I don't need flight attendants. I fly a 4-passenger or 4-place airplane. Well, yeah, but how many times have you had kids or other problem people in the back seats and they're distracting while you're flying? You need to recruit a flight attendant to take care of that. It's probably the right seat person, whatever. But the main reason among those team reasons is that every airline flight is dispatched by a team made up initially of the captain and the FAA licensed dispatcher. The dispatcher has his own sub-team, if you will, supporting him, and the captain has his own sub-team, maintenance guys, co-pilot, flight attendants supporting him. That's like an insurance policy, because we can do better, as we've seen, with a team than by ourselves. Here's some quotes from Kern on teamwork. Good teamwork begins with effective leadership. As the pilot, you are generally the leader, although sometimes you have to be the follower too. Good teams establish norms of safety, compliance, communication, and cooperation. I think a good example here is, let's say that you own your own airplane, got it in your own hangar, and the way you get the airplane fueled is you call up the FBO when you're out there with the door open or the airplane pulled out, and they come over with a fuel truck and they fuel it. Well, how many of us, when the fuel truck arrives, or maybe even before it arrives, we've given them our order over the phone, we go do something else. And the fueler, let's say, doesn't fuel the airplane right. He puts 20 more gallons in the right wing than the left wing. And but he's good. He fesses up to you when you show up, come back to the airplane. He says, "Sir, I'm sorry, I got the fuel load imbalance. You want me to rebalance it for you?" And you say, "Nah, I can fly. I don't need to worry about that. I can fly." Why are you telling me that? Don't worry about it. Just, how much gas you put in. It's what I ordered. Yeah, okay. Don't worry about it. That is setting that team up then for a disconnect in communications, because that fueler next time may not even want to tell you about it because you treated it that way. So as a leader, you have to set those norms of safety, compliance, communication, and cooperation. A good team establishes an environment conducive to good team operations. And this environment fosters assertiveness, honesty, and trust. And I would say from a safety culture point of view, those are the three bedrock principles. You got to have that in a safe operation. All right, let's look at the pillar of knowledge, environment. Here's what Kern has to say about the environment. Our operational environment can affect safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. In short, our airmanship. Knowledge of the environment is by far the most difficult of the pillars of knowledge to master. Begin with a solid understanding of the physical environment, weather, navigation, runway, all of that, physical environment, topography. Make flight planning a methodical exercise that completely covers all of the environmental factors you might encounter in flight. Now, with all my time and experience in the industry, I have come to the conclusion that the only safe way to do flight planning is with a checklist, because you're almost always pressured at the end before you launch with your flight planning. Now, you might have done your basic flight planning the day or two before, route and all that. And so you weren't pressured, but when you get out there to go fly, where you got to check the weather before you go, and maybe modify the flight plan, all of that stuff, you're under pressure. You need to be methodical, and the best way to be methodical is with a checklist. So develop for yourself all of the items that you want to cover on your pre-flights, your pre-flight planning, and then lay out a checklist for yourself and go through it every time. The multi-layered regulatory environment is of critical importance to the physical longevity of all aviators. Want to stay alive, we got to know the multi-layered regulatory environment. Of course, that's FAA, that's the regulations within whatever flight operation we're flying, local airport regulations, international regulations, on and on. We have a lot of regulations, but we have to know what it is. Whether we like it or not, we have to know that environment inside and out. So find out about your organization, Kern says. And you are flying within some kind of an organization, even if you're flying your own airplane out of your own hangar. Find out about that organization and make it better. Be at home in all of the environments you operate in. And by be at home, I believe Kern means you've got to be good at it. You've got to be comfortable. Well, let's talk about the physical environment for a minute. The physical environment is the medium in which we operate. It influences almost everything we do in an airplane. It includes some of the factors that remain relatively constant and others that change. So the weather's changing all the time. An environmental factor would be the runway, where we fly on and off on all the time. That doesn't change much, except maybe with contamination or no, but the runway is the same most of the time. So they change, or they're relatively constant. The regulatory environment. Many regs should be written in red ink because their origins can be traced to the blood of fallen aviators. And I'd modify that sentence a little bit and say, I think all the regs are written in red ink, at least that pertain to operations. We made the mistakes. Our our ancestors in aviation made the mistakes that then became regulations to keep others from making those mistakes. However, many pilots feel that flying has become overregulated. I hear this all the time out there in the pilot community. Oh, that's one of the reasons general aviation is going down the tubes. It's overregulated. Others disagree, citing the need for more stringent regs. I'm sorry, but I am in this camp. I think there are a lot of places where the regs are not stringent enough. I'll give you a couple examples. The flight review required every 2 years, as I mentioned earlier. Not often enough by a long shot. Not structured enough by a long shot. We need more regulations in that area, in my opinion. Another big one is instrument flying. The requirement, the reg says, and this is an example of legal but not safe, that to be current with your instrument rating, to be able to go out and fly in the system in the weather, you have to have 6 approaches, intercept and track a nav leg, and a holding pattern once every 6 months. Now, it doesn't say the approaches have to be down to minimums under the hood or anything else, just 6 approaches. Well, tracking and intercepting and tracking nav leg, well, you do that when you do the approaches, and the holding pattern. Well, okay. But it leaves out missed approaches, which I have seen in the simulator to be one of the biggest weaknesses of personal flyers, at least the guys I'm seeing with these high-performance singles and twins who have instrument ratings and consider themselves to be experienced and current instrument pilots. In their logbook, they're showing those 6 approaches: intercept, track, and hold. But about 85% of them fail to execute a compliant and safe missed approach. They can't do it. And when it happens, of course, we stop the simulator to talk about it, and invariably, they cite right off the top as their reason for doing a lousy job is, I never do this in the real world. You never have to go around, and if I do, ATC is going to give me a straight out. Well, sorry, folks. That isn't how it works in real life. So you've got to be good at this. So why isn't that in the regulation? So there's 2 examples. There are many more of where the regulations, I think, should be more stringent. We are bound by the regulatory environment in which we fly. So whether we like it or not, we've got to comply with those regulations. In the first instance, if we get away with breaking a reg by not killing ourselves, we may not get away from being seen, and then we lose our flying privileges for a short period up to forever. But busting those regulations can also get you killed. So we've got to comply with the regulations whether we like it or not. Other pilots base their actions on the expectation of our compliance. And I'll say this. If you're out there, if you're a rogue aviator, you're out there flying in the same airspace as me, and you're not complying with the regulations, then you're putting me at danger, because I'm expecting you to comply, and therefore I expect to see you enter the traffic pattern properly or whatever it might be. If you don't do it, you put me at risk. So guess what? I see you doing it. I'm the first guy on the phone to the FAA, and you ought to be the first guy on the phone to the FAA if you see anybody else doing it, because those people, rogue aviators, choose to be non-compliant, and when they make that choice, they put us in danger. They don't have that right. All right, let's talk about the organizational environment. Now, again, we all fly in some kind of an organization. It might be very loose, or it might be a real structured organization. Organizational environment, and this can also be called corporate culture, applies some of the concepts and methods from cultural anthropology and business to modern organizations. So this corporate culture thing has been around at least since the early 80s. I, in fact, had a consulting business where we did corporate culture work in the early 80s. I think it started right around then, maybe a little earlier. So it's been around for quite a while now. The organizational environment should employ the principles of shared decision-making, advocacy, and assertiveness. The organizational environment should include a safety culture and a safety management system. So really, when we talk about an aviation corporate culture, we're talking about a safety culture. Now, it has some other aspects to it too, but it's primarily a safety culture. We're going to talk a lot more about safety cultures, and within those safety cultures, if they're good, they've got a safety management system, and we'll talk a lot more about that too later on. All right, let's look at the last pillar of knowledge, risk. I think this is great, this tagline here. There's a fine line between taking a calculated risk and doing something dumb. And that fine line is awful hard to see and keep in focus. It's real easy to not recognize when we've stepped over that fine line, and now we're doing something really dumb. And notice that this tagline says calculated risk. In other words, we knew the risk was there, we calculated our chances, and we took the risk. So a very, very thin line there between doing something dumb and taking that risk. Count von Moltke, who was a Prussian Army Chief of Staff back in the 1800s, said, "First reckon, then risk." Well, my mother was of German descent, and she used to always tell me, look before you leap. So she must have heard from Count Moltke, I guess, way back there someplace. But we know this. We hear it all the time. Again, probably our mothers told us this when we were young. First reckon, then risk. So don't just take risks without calculating them, thinking them through. Kern, you must understand the other elements of airmanship to understand, assess, and manage risk. And you must manage risk to grow in airmanship. So as you'll see as we go through this whole series, the whole model is synergistic. You can't just pick one of those 10 elements in the model and say, I'm going to work on this. You've got to work on it all. They all fit together. Risk-taking in general here. Let's talk about that. Risk is the probability and severity of a loss linked to a hazard. So it isn't just will it happen, it's what'll happen, what's it like after it happens. We've got to look at that too, and we assess risks. We must manage risk by either controlling it, avoiding it altogether, reducing it, spreading it around, or transferring it someplace else. So we've got those are the ways that we can manage risk. And again, there are procedures that back up this kind of thinking, these thought processes. You can learn this. Here's some quotes from Kern on risk. Aviation will never be completely free of risk. I never like to say never, but I think he's probably right. The ability of an airman to understand and analyze multiple risk factors. There's multiple risk factors on every flight. And then act on them using skill and good judgment will always be one of the principal benchmarks of expertise in aviation. So here's a question. How would you rate your current level of airmanship in the 5 pillars of knowledge? Is it low, okay, or excellent? And this is part of self-assessment, asking yourself these questions. All right, finally, let's take a look at the Capstone outcomes. Situational awareness is the first one. Situational awareness, when we refer to as SA frequently, is the accurate perception of what is going on both now and in the near future. Now I'm going to show you a FAA Venn diagram that I think really puts it in picture format and makes it easy to remember. Situational awareness, SA, is in the sweet spot. It's in the center of what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen. In other words, if you can always keep in your mind and be processing what has happened, what is happening right now, and then what might happen because of all of that, then you are situationally aware. And again, you can learn the processes and procedures to do this. How important is situational awareness? Well, case studies and accident analyses from all areas of aviation tell us that SA is essential. In analysis of all Air Force mishaps from 1989 through 95, so a pretty long period there, lost situational awareness was the single largest contributing factor. Another Air Force study of air-to-air combat kills estimated that 90% of all aircraft that were shot down never saw their attacker. Situational awareness. Here's some Kern quotes on situational awareness. Situational awareness is the filter through which every aviator's action must be viewed. So if you don't have situational awareness, then your actions are going to be judged by others as being erratic, irrational, dangerous. SA feeds aviator decision-making and judgment. SA cannot be viewed in isolation. All foundations and pillars of airmanship can support or detract from situational awareness. Situational awareness can and should be improved by individual effort. SA is not an innate quality. You just weren't born with SA, but rather a higher echelon piece of the airmanship whole. So again, the bedrock principles, the 5 pillars of knowledge, feed into situational awareness. We can improve SA to whatever degree we have the will and discipline to achieve. And let's look at the final element of the Kern Airmanship model and Capstone outcome, judgment. Let's define it first. Webster says judgment is the process of forming an opinion or evaluation by discerning or comparing. Kern says judgment is the process of comparing and evaluating courses of action as defined by the pilot and the extended flight team. So, judgment. Judgment, like all other aspects of airmanship, must be viewed holistically. It's an interactive part of the airmanship whole. Judgment is demonstrated in almost everything an aviator does. It includes adequate mental and physical preparation for a flight, so you make a judgment as to whether or not you're going to do that. It includes briefings, debriefings, and critiques. Critiques are critical. At the airlines, flight crews now are required to critique every flight. It means they have to formally sit down together, or maybe they do it over dinner in the cab on the way to the hotel, whatever. But they have to do it, it's left up to the captain's discretion. However, the framework that the airline wants the captain to use is pretty much like this. What did we do well on that flight? Talk about that. What could we have done better on that flight? Talk about that. And how can we improve our airmanship overall? And if you approach the debrief that way, the critique, then you're not challenging yourself or the other person, or you're not putting them in a challenged position. You're not saying, what happened? You did that wrong. What you're saying is, well, we could have done that better, or we messed up there. So you don't want to get anybody, if you're flying with somebody else, you don't want to get them defensive. And if you are flying by yourself and you're going to self-critique, then you need to keep an open mind and not, oh, geez, I was 5 knots fast on final. I'm an idiot. I'm no good. Can't beat up on yourself. It has to be an open mind, clear, rigorous evaluation of the flight. As the pinnacle of a complex human equation, understanding and improving judgment requires a solid foundation of airmanship knowledge, so we have to know what airmanship is, a process for study and improvement, so again, got to have that process, can't just be willy-nilly. If you have those things, then you can improve judgment. Poor judgment has a significant impact on all areas of aviation. The tragic results of poor judgments are evident in nearly every accident study conducted in recent years. In one 5-year study of general aviation accidents, decisional errors accounted for more than 50% of fatal errors. So, we're the enemy. The aircraft, if you're flying a modern airplane with all the safety devices, glass cockpit, you learn it, you know how to do it, you've been trained properly, we're down to this personal issue. We're the ones causing the accidents. 80 to 90% of all accidents, pilot error. Here are some quotes from Kern on judgment. Good judgment is at the pinnacle of airmanship. All other factors, discipline, flying skills, knowledge, and situational awareness, support good judgment. Good judgment, in turn, supports all 3 major goals of airmanship: safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. The foundations and pillars of knowledge of airmanship form the basis for good judgment and decision-making. Judgment is not a magical quality, just like SA. It's not magical. It's not something we're born with. It can be taught and learned. The improvement process demands disciplined attention and constant self-critique. In the final analysis, our judgment is as good as we want to make it. So here's a question for you on the Capstone outcomes. How do you think where would you rate your airmanship level here? Low, okay, or excellent? Self-assessment. All right. Any comments or questions? Okay, I see no one has a comment or question, so we'll move on. And we'll take a break. Let's take about a 5-minute break here. Okay, welcome back. Let's get a little deeper into using the Kern Airmanship model in a continuous airmanship development plan. And as an example, as we go through this, let's do a case study, but we're going to use a case study that I made up. This is not a real pilot, but you've probably seen him around the airport, Joe Pilot. Joe's profile. He's 49 years old. He has a private certificate that he got 10 years ago. He has no additional ratings on his private pilot certificate. His total flight time over those 10 years is about 250 hours, 150 cross-country, 25 night, and 10 hood. Flight time in the last 12 months, 20 hours. Aircraft types flown, 152, 172, 182, but none of them are glass, so he's an old steam gauge guy. To develop an airmanship development plan, I recommend you use a process, and this is one process. There are several. I like this one. It's a 7-step process. First step is assess your current airmanship level. So Joe has some tasks that he has to accomplish to do that. He has to, he should. Now, again, this is a made-up scenario, so this doesn't apply to everyone. This isn't the recipe. This is just an example. The task he's going to complete is he's going to complete the 6-hour Redefining Airmanship webinar series. He's going to complete the 11-webinar Kern Airmanship Model in Detail series, so he's going to get a real good foundation in airmanship. He's going to complete the Center for Airmanship Excellence Airmanship Assessment Questionnaire. He's going to review that assessment questionnaire with a mentor pilot or senior CFI. He's going to conduct an airmanship assessment flight with that mentor pilot. Remember, you really need to have somebody else looking at your current level of airmanship. I mean, you need to evaluate it yourself, but you have to have someone else look at it too. And then they're going to discuss the results. Those are the tasks he's going to complete in step 1. Also in step 1, he's going to, let's look at what that assessment showed in his first step here. Joe had no comprehensive initial training. He learned out at Frank's Flight School out in the middle of Iowa and on a grass strip, and it was real casual. It took him a couple, 3 years to get his private, and so it was not really good initial training. He's had no meaningful recurrent training over the past 10 years. He's gotten his flight review every 2 years, and that's it. He flew approximately 4 hours a month for a few years after he obtained his private pilot. but he's flown less than 4 hours per month in recent years. Joe had not been pursuing airmanship excellence, but now he's committed to it. He and his mentor pilot decided that, boy, yeah, he really is committed to it. However, they discovered in that flight that Joe is very rusty in all of the Kern Airmanship model elements. He's an enthusiastic pilot who is determined to improve his airmanship. So what we've got here is a guy that does not have really good initial training. He hasn't really had recurrent training. He hasn't been flying very much. He hasn't gotten any additional ratings, so he hasn't been developing his airmanship. He's rusty in each one of the discipline, skill, proficiency, the knowledge pillars, the capstone outcomes. He's not very good at any of those. But he's enthusiastic. He's really determined to improve his airmanship, and that's the key factor, really. All right, now we're up to step 2. State the airmanship development goals. The test for Joe here and his mentor pilot, he's going to meet with a mentor pilot to determine realistic airmanship development goals. In other words, he's at the private, and an unrealistic airmanship goal would be instrument rating. Now, yeah, that can be a long-range goal, but it's too long-range for this development plan. He might decide that he's going to take a piece of that goal in this airmanship development plan because he's rusty in all of his skills. So he might say, well, I'm going to get, in this plan, I'm going to put in 5 hours of hood time. So that'll count towards my instrument rating, and it will get me back up to speed flying on instruments. But you don't want to take a huge leap like from private to instrument. You want to have nearer term goals, easier to achieve, cost less money, can get them done in a shorter time. Joe and the mentor pilot identify airmanship development goals relative to what kind of flying Joe wants to do. So in other words, you can't just say, my goal is to be able to shoot an instrument approach down to 200.5. Well, that's unrealistic at this stage for Joe because he isn't going to go out and do that kind of flying. So even if he gets that skill down, he's not certified to do that, he's not qualified to do it, so then his skill will deteriorate. So it's a waste of time. Joe wants to, he's got to decide how he's going to use the airplane. Is he going to fly day only, day and night, what kind of airplane? So all of that has to be cranked into deciding what goals to set. Of course, we have to take into account Joe's current airmanship level. That's why we went through the process of evaluating that. And then they came up with these goals. Joe's going to establish and maintain a high level of flight discipline. And remember, he's going to go through the webinars, so he's going to learn a lot more about what flight discipline is and how to achieve it. He's going to bring skill levels back to those required for private pilot certificates. So that's his goal on this plan, is just get his skill back to what he needed for private pilot, because then he'll be safe for that kind of flying. He also wants to be proficient in all of the private pilot PTS areas of operation. So he wants to go beyond just having minimum skill now to being proficient. He wants to obtain and maintain a level of knowledge in all of the 5 pillars of knowledge that are at least at the levels required to obtain a private pilot certificate. Well, he's been out of it so long, or been away from the private pilot training so long, 10 years, that I can guarantee you he's probably going to have to get this private pilot ground school course back out and go through it again, because there's a lot of that stuff he's forgotten. So he's going to have to bring everything in those 5 pillars of knowledge back up to the private pilot level. He's going to learn and be proficient in situational awareness procedures and techniques. So there again, you learn situational awareness by learning the techniques and the procedures of achieving it. He's going to learn and be proficient in aeronautical judgment procedures and techniques. Same thing there. He's going to reach a level of airmanship that will allow confidence in flying day and night VFR on trips of up to 500 miles from home base with ADSO support. And ADSO is a generic term for an aviation, it's the acronym for a generic term, Airmanship Development Support Organization. So this means that's his team. Joe has an effective team, dispatchers, maintenance, mentor pilots, all of that wrapped around him. And so therefore, because the mentor pilot and Joe know that, then they can craft the level of qualification he has to reach to do this kind of flying. and he's going to complete comprehensive upgrade training in a modern aircraft with a glass cockpit. That's one of his goals here in this airmanship development plan that he and the mentor pilot are putting together. Wants to check out on a new airplane. All right, then still step 2 here, stating the airmanship development goals. We're going to run them through, we're going to refine them with the Kern Airmanship model. We're going to look at every element. So here's how we do that. Discipline goals. We're going to consistently use normal checklists at every phase of flight transition. You know, really you use your checklist, to make sure you don't miss anything, but you also use it, it's a form of discipline. And the way that works is, if you get lazy on using that checklist, you're very likely, if you get into an emergency and then do run the emergency checklist, because you don't have the discipline of running that checklist at every change in phase of flight, you forget to run the normal checklist. So you've got to be, it's a discipline issue as much as it is a memory issue, checking that you got everything. He's also going to use flight preparation checklists for every flight. That's discipline. He's not going to just do it this way one time and another way another time. He's going to be disciplined. He's going to use a flight risk evaluation tool for every flight. These tools now, they're available. Flightplan.com has one. AOPA has one. The FAA has one. There are a lot of ways of obtaining these tools and using them. Like, for example, the AOPA is an online tool. But a flight risk evaluation tool, if you're not familiar with it, sometimes it's called a FRAT, F-R-A-T, Flight Risk Awareness Tool. It's called both things. But basically what you do is you take every phase of flight, you identify the risks in it. Well, the risks are pretty common to all flights. Like, for example, is it a day flight or a night flight? If it's a day flight, there's one level of risk. If there's a night flight, there's a higher level of risk. So if you select night flight, for example, that has a numerical value. That goes over in the right-hand column. Then you say, is the weather at the destination VFR or IFR? And if you choose IFR, obviously higher risk than VFR, so that has a numerical value. So you go all the way through methodically, all the risks that you would face in your flight, and by selecting if that risk is included in your flight, you add up, you create a list of numbers you can add up to give you an overall flight risk value. And then the risk evaluator, because a lot of smart guys have worked on it and put it together, and it's not just an off-the-wall thing, will tell you if you have a score of, let's make some numbers up. Let's say that if you have a score from 100 to 100, above 100, it's red, it's dangerous, given your level of qualifications. If it's between 50 and 100, it's amber, and if it's less than 50, it's green. So that, again, you have to take that with a grain of salt. It's not, exactly precise in evaluating the risk, but what it does is it's discipline. It requires you to go through every risk that pertains to that flight and evaluate it. And then you come up with that score, and then it focuses your attention on that risk. And then, of course, you can find ways to mitigate that risk and bring it to the amber at least, or up into the green. For most flights, you might accept amber sometimes, given the particular situation. Another discipline that Joe is going to shoot for is he's going to critique every flight, and he's going to learn more about flight discipline. So those are the discipline areas, those are the goals within the area of the Kern Airmanship model that Joe has built into his airmanship development plan. Now let's look at skills, how you use the model, the Kern Airmanship model, to develop these goals. He's going to consistently perform all maneuvers to private pilot practical test standards. So that's a skill level. Those PTSs are a skill level. So he's going to get back to that consistently. He's going to consistently perform all standard operating procedures accurately. That's a skill. Consistently accurate and clear communications with his team. Remember, communications is a skill. Consistently make good decisions during all phases of flight operations. He's going to consistently perform as effective team member. He's going to consistently accurate self-assessments. So those are all skills that he's going to work on as goals. Proficiency goals: fly at least 4 hours per month, because we think that's the minimum, or he and his mentor pilot think that's the minimum for him to be proficient. He's going to pass a proficiency check ride, not a private pilot check ride that only checks the minimum standards, safety standards. It's going to check for proficiency because he wants to be proficient in operating his airplane. Knowledge of self goals. He's going to increase knowledge of personal fatigue factors. He's going to improve self-assessment techniques. He's going to acquire better study habits and learning skills. Under knowledge of aircraft, he's going to memorize all of his emergency memory items. Now, I know all of you have memorized all of your memory items on your emergency checklists, and you can cite them right now to me if I ask you an emergency. If I say engine fire, you can rattle it off, right? Well, I know you and I are that way, but I run into a lot of pilots that aren't that way. And again, you have to work on that. The way I always did it, or still do it actually, I'm sorry, is I use flashcards. I write the name of the emergency on one side, I have all the memory items in the checklist on the other side, and I'll flash that card up, say engine fire, and I'll run through from memory all the steps. Then I'll turn the card over, see if I got them right, which reinforces the learning, and that's how I keep those steps, memory, action items in my memory bank. So he's going to work on that. He's going to perform all standard operating procedure flows from memory. A much better way to operate a cockpit is to have flows. All the checklist items should be included in flows. You know, you start in one part of the panel and you flow across and come down and go around, whatever it is for your airplane, and then you use the checklist to check that you did all those. He's going to increase understanding of all aircraft systems, so he's going to read that book a lot more and talk to mechanics. He's going to increase understanding of his aircraft performance. This is a big weakness with most personal flyers. They don't even dig into those charts after they get their certificate. They're private. You've got to really understand all the nuances and all of the things that go into calculating aircraft performance. So he's going to do that. That's a goal. Under knowledge of team, he's going to increase familiarity with the roles and responsibilities of all the team members. He may think he knows what they do, what their job is like, but he's going to take time, talk to them, and he's going to get more familiar with everything they do. And in particular, this particular plan, he's going to learn about flight dispatcher policies and procedures. So he's working with that flight dispatcher. He's got a better understanding of the constraints and the policies and the procedures that that flight dispatcher is using, so they can be better teammates. And environment, he's going to increase knowledge of local weather. He's got the basics, but he needs to look at certain things. You know, if the wind blows this way from this direction at this airport, you know, does that create turbulence if I'm on approach to this runway, all that sort of thing. He's going to review all pertinent FAA regulations. Now, I don't know about you, but I got to review the regulations continuously because I forget them. And so that's got to be one of those things that becomes discipline, and you have to have a process to allow you to review those things continuously. He's going to review all the ADSO, Airmanship Development Support Organization, that's the group, the organization he's flying in. He's going to review all the policies and procedures. That's like the FAA regulations. There'll be a book or they'll be online, but there'll be several pages at least of policies and procedures for the flight organization. And then finally, in risks, he's going to increase knowledge of aircraft-related risks. You know, how can the airplane get them? What risks are involved there? He's going to understand details of risk assessment tools. Remember, we talked about that. There's tools that can be used. He's going to increase knowledge of risk mitigation techniques. So again, these are goals for this plan. After this plan, he'll have another plan. So he's not trying to get it all done, become the expert airman all in one, within one plan here. It's a series of plans. Going to have to have realistic near-term goals within each plan. Now his goals in situational awareness, he's going to increase his knowledge of situational awareness techniques. He's going to strive for a consistently high level of situational awareness. Those are his two goals under situational awareness. And under judgment, he's going to increase knowledge of aeronautical decision-making techniques. And I kind of think of those terms, aeronautical decision-making and judgment, as interchangeable. And he wants to strive for consistently good judgment. He doesn't want to have times where when he self-critiques the flight, he says, oh man, I really blew that. I never should have made that go decision. That was poor judgment. He wants to have consistently good judgment. So that's the 7-step process. Then after he's got his goals, and in the Redefining Airmanship series, we go into this process in great detail. I'm not going to do that here in this one. I'm just going to tell you what the other steps are. Define training requirements is next. You need the airplane, you need an instructor, whatever. Define and locate the resources. Where do I get those things? Then you're going to state specific objectives for each flight. Then you're going to plan the instruction, lesson plan, and all the other ground training that's going to go around it. You want to have a plan written down. Then you're going to conduct the training on your own and with the instructor. Then you're going to assess your new airmanship level. And if it's where you wanted it to be, you reached your goals, great. Now you design a new airmanship development plan that takes you to higher goals. If you didn't reach your goals, your plan then is to figure out what you did wrong and then make up a new plan that'll get you to those goals. So it sounds complicated, but it's really very simple. And like anything else in flying, once you do it a few times, a piece of cake. All right, here's a final perspective. The bedrock principles of flight discipline, skill, and proficiency, coupled with the 5 pillars of knowledge of self, aircraft, team, environment, and risk, lead to good situational awareness and judgment. So that's the flow through. You can see training can flow through there, development plan can flow through there, your thinking about every flight can flow through there. So this model works for a lot of things in airmanship development. Now, I know you may have just seen this for the first time, or maybe you've seen it 2 or 3 times before, but it takes several times of working with this model to integrate it and use it all the time. But I'm to that point now. I have been working on this a lot for about a year and a half, looking at this model, teaching it, talking about it, thinking about it, and I've got it pretty well integrated. And you will too after you work with it for a while. So here's a question. How likely are you to seek continuous airmanship improvement? Not likely at all. You think this is a bunch of hooey, it's too hard, you can't do it, it's not for you. Are you somewhat likely? Well, you're going to take a little bit more look at it and then get into it. Maybe not. Likely, yeah, this looks like a pretty good idea. Or are you very likely? Yeah, I'm sold. This is the way I'm going from now on. So, are there any questions or comments at this point? Okay, I see there are no questions or comments. Don't forget to register for session 2. You have to register for each one of the sessions. Just registering for one of them doesn't register you for all of them. And the next webinar will be on flight discipline, that first bedrock principle, and I think the most important bedrock principle. Here's my contact info. If you have any questions come on your mind later, any comments, I'm looking for feedback from this webinar series so we can make the future webinars better. So feel free to either call me at this number or email me. And again, the Center for Airmanship Excellence website is airmanshipexcellence.org. And I hope that you are coming to believe, like I now believe, that if you're going to fly, you've got to do it right. Thank you for attending. I'm looking forward to working with you in future webinars.